unknown number of times. Basically used to repeat a section of code an unknown number of times. So if you have a certain code that needs to be repeated, say n number of times, where n will be decided during the runtime, you can definitely opt for a while loop. And every time you move into a while loop, a specific condition is checked. The minute that condition results in false, that's when you exit out of the while loop. So here's the syntax for a while loop. You have the while keyword followed by the expression or the condition. This is what needs to result in true to enter the while loop, and the expression is followed by colons, and in the very next line you can put down the various statements that go into your while loop. So now that we saw what a while loop is typically used for and the basic syntax of a while loop, let's move into a few demos and explore the various applications of while loop. So I'll be performing my demos on PyCharm. Now my first demo is a typical example of any loop statement. Suppose I want to print these strings simply learn 10 times. I could do this using the print statement alone and have the statement copy pasted 10 times. That could work, but with loops we have a much simpler way of doing this. Since we are talking about while loops, that's what we'll use. So say while, and I want to print my string 10 times. So I is my counter, and I say I less than equal to 10, colon, and in here I put my print statement just once. Now I is the counter, as I mentioned previously. So this counter needs to be initialized first. We need to give it a starting value. So i's starting value will be 1, and I will move from 1 to 10. That means every time you're inside the loop, every time simply learn is printed, I needs to be incremented by 1. So I equal to I plus 1. Now a shorthand of doing this is you can have I plus equal to 1. This is exactly the same as I equal to I plus 1, just shorter and simpler. So I'll explain this once again before we run it. We have I equal to 1, where I is something that we're using as a counter. And then we have our while loop. So in our while loop, we are checking if I is less than equal to 10. And since the first time I is equal to 1, we will enter the while loop. Simply learn will be printed. And in the very next line, we are incrementing I. So every time simply learn is printed, I gets incremented. We go back to the while loop and it's checked against this condition whether it's less than equal to 10. So the minute I is equal to 10, you'll have simply learn printed one last time. The next time we go back to the while loop, I will be 11 and the while condition would result in false. So we exit out of the loop, and since we have no more statements here, our program terminates. So let's run the code and check if everything works as we expect it to. So here we go. Simply learn is printed 10 times. Now can you only increment your counter? No, we can also decrement our counter. So if I say I is equal to 10, that is I start my counter from 10 and I want to decrease the counter till 1. So we'll have the while loop executed as long as I is greater than 1. And now that we're decrementing I every time, we need to change the plus sign to a minus. So it's the exact same thing that we're doing now as we did previously. We are printing simply learn the string 10 times, but this time our counter starts from 10 and we go down to 1. So every time we check if I is greater than 1, and the minute I is not greater than 1, that is I is equal to 1, we do not print simply learn anymore, we just exit out of the while loop. So let's run this code too. So here the string simply learns printed only 9 times, whereas we want it to be printed 10 times. This because in our while condition statement, we put greater than 1. What we need is actually greater than equal to 1, so that even when I is equal to 1, we are printing simply learn once. So now if we run it again, we'll see that we'll have simply learn printed 10 times. So for our next demo, instead of printing something 10 times, let's find the sum of the first 10 natural numbers. So in that case, I would start from 1 and then we go all the way up till 10. So I is less than equal to 10. And within your while loop, we can remove this print statement. And now every time I needs to be added to some other variable. So we'll call that variable sum, and sum equal to sum plus I. So I starts from 1, and every time you go inside the while loop, you have to check if I is less than equal to 10. So as long as I is less than 10, you move into the while loop, and in the while loop, you keep adding this I to another variable sum. And after it's added, you increment the value of I, so that I goes all the way from 1 up till 10. And once I is 11, the while condition results in false and you break out of the while loop, moving to the next statement after the while loop, which in our case would be the print statement to print the final sum. So let's run this code. So can you guess what the error is in this case? Our variable sum here has not been declared or initialized previously. So outside our while loop, let's have a variable sum, and sum's initial value should be 0. Let's run the code now. And there you go. So the sum of your first 10 natural numbers would be 55. Now let's modify this code slightly so we can find the sum of the even numbers between 1 to 10. So our first few lines would remain the same. I will start from 1, sum will be equal to 0. Our while condition 2 will be the same, but this time inside our while loop, we'll have an if statement, and the if statement will check if I is an even number. So to check if a number is even, the remainder from the division of the number with 2 should be equal to 0. So I mod 2 equal to 0. And if that is the case, we can find the sum of the number. And whether that's the case or not, we still need to increment I every time within the while loop. So sum would come under the if statement, but I plus equal to 1 would remain under the while loop and not within the if statement. So I'll repeat this once again. I, which is our counter variable, will start from 1. Sum will be equal to 0. Every time our while loop will check if I is less than equal to 10. And every time I is less than 10, we can enter the while loop. Now within the while loop, we need to check if I is an even number, because we want to find the sum of only the even numbers. So if I mod 2 is 0, that means I is an even number, and we can add I to our variable sum. Now whether I is an even number or an odd number, every time we still need to increment I. So our incrementing statement would be outside the if statement and under the while loop. And finally, once we exit the while loop, we'll print our sum. We run the code, and the sum of all the even numbers between 1 to 10 is 30. Now let's explore while loop for the very purpose it was made, that is to run a certain code unknown number of times. So for this demo, we'll work on reversing an integer. So the first thing we do is we need to take the input from the user. So the user will give us the integer, and I'll store my input in the variable n. We also need to convert the input from the user into integer because it'll be provided in the string format. So we have the int function within which we'll have our input function. Now we'll declare another variable nr, which is basically our reverse n, and this will be initialized to 0. Now suppose n is equal to 5, 6, 7, 8. nr
सुजीत शर्मा, आपका फोन बज रहा है।
7, 6, 5. So if you